High Stakes Fantasy Network. I'm, of course, your host, Greg Ambrosius, and I'm joined today by another special guest. He's none other than Nelson Sousa of FTNFantasy.com. He's one of the best high-stakes fantasy football players in the country. Nelson, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we're going to talk about fantasy football, but I'm looking at your team page right now, and I see 5 NFBC baseball teams in first place, 2 in second place in our RotoWire Online Championship Leagues. I think you got 10 teams. 7 of them are in the money right now. Now, I know you decided to dabble in fantasy baseball because you want to do it with your son this year, but you're killing it, man. What the hell's going on there?
Yeah, again, he had fun with it last year, and we decided to just do it as more of like a fun type of deal and get him to, start learning a lot of the players, the baseball players and everything. So that's what it started off as. And then I kind of got the itch to do a few extra teams. So that's how we ended up at 10 instead of 3.
So I think you used Vlad Sedler's rankings from FTNFantasy.com. Why are your teams doing so much better than Vlad's right now?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, when it comes to baseball, I'm kind of a fish out of water. I just started studying maybe 2 weeks before I started drafting. Just started looking at all the injuries and different things, and picked Vlad and Matty Davis's brain, get their thoughts on guys. And my biggest thing was like, okay, who are the guys to avoid? I just wanted to just make sure that I wasn't picking any duds in their early rounds. And
that was a softball question for you to rip on Vlad, though, because you're having a better year than him. So
is I don't know. Is he struggling?
Not badly, but I wanted to give you kudos because you used the same rankings and you're just kicking his ass right now.
All right, I'm going to have to use that for bragging rights.
Well, it's a long season, as you know, with baseball. It's a marathon. So,
yeah,
you know what? I was looking at your
lap, even if it's the first month.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Hey, so I was looking at your historical teams page, and I noticed that you first started with us in baseball in 2009. In fact, you won an online championship league team that year. Now, I know your son's a good baseball player, but is there a hidden love for baseball here that I didn't know about?
Yeah, for sure. 100%. It's funny because you had asked me that question the other day when we were talking as far as like, how I got started in high stakes and everything. And I actually, with NFBC, I got started with baseball at first. And what happened was I thought I was pretty good at this, in my home leagues. So I was researching, looking for a little more competition, if there was any type of higher stakes contests out there. And it brought me to the NFBC message board. And back then it was pretty active.
Yeah.
And so I went on the message board, and one of the guys that was, on there quite a bit was Sean Childs. And so I ended up reaching out to him in a private message and just asking him, hey, have you been doing this a long time? What does it look like? Money wise, is it safe to invest, money in these leagues, things like that. And then come to find out, I was born in Boston and grew up in Boston for the early part of my life. And come to find out, Sean's from like the Cape. So, very familiar with it. So we, met up and chatting and, became friends. And he kind of, pointed me in that direction for NFBC with baseball. Always been a fan of baseball. And then fantasy football, I actually was, Wyckoff is where I started with football. Okay.
So how long have you been playing fantasy, like you said, local leagues and such like that before you got into high stakes?
It's probably been about like 20 years that I started doing fantasy football and baseball between, local leagues and then high stakes.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's cool. And so you played WCFF. Did you have luck with WCFF before you came to NFFC?
I did. So the story there is it was my first year in the WCOF, and I was looking to do a couple of main events, and I wanted to see if anyone wanted to invest in me. And I was over on the message board, and I told Sean, said, "Oh, just post it on the message board that you're looking for somebody to invest in you." And I was like, "No one knows me from a hole in the wall. What? Why would they do that?" So I ended up doing it on my own, and one of the main event teams that I drafted that year ended up in second place overall, and I won 60,000.
Really?
And then from there, just parlayed those winnings, and started doing NFFC and more more teams and bigger, and it just kind of went from there.
That's interesting. So again, that's the purpose of this podcast, is to show people that the name people, you're a name person now in the high stakes. You got to start out somewhere, right? And you can't be afraid to maybe invest a little bit money to get going. But if you're very good, you can win just like anybody else, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, my first year of fantasy football was 2 teams. That's it.
Yep. Well, it's interesting. You did reach out to the right guy, because Sean is a Hall of Famer in the NFBC, and he's a good promoter of our contests as well. And he'll talk to anybody and give his secrets away to anybody. So you definitely got the right person. So let's talk about fantasy football and your success in high stakes. I mean, you've won 2 NFFC Platinum League titles with us. That's our $20,000 entry fee contest, $165,000 league prize. You won 5 NFFC Primetime League titles over the last 2 years. You also won a Silver Bullet League title last year. So first of all, I got to just ask you, is there any magic formula for winning in fantasy football? Or, I mean, is it just hard work, film study, stat study, following trends? What is it that makes a good fantasy football high stakes player?
I think to have success over time, I think you have to have the time to invest in fantasy football. There's a lot of stats and analytics to oversee. I'm more of what you would call like a film guy. I like to watch the games and see with my own eyes if I think the player is talented or not, and I'd like to think that I do a decent job at talent evaluation when it comes to that. Been watching football since I was a little kid, and I think you got to have the time to invest in it. And then for the people that don't, and they have their regular job or career during the week where they're working 40, 50 hours, whatever it is. And then you got family and all sorts of things. Everyone's busy. I think it's all about subscribing or investing in the right content to help you with those fantasy teams. So I don't look at it as like myself where, I've got plenty of time, to do this and put the work in. But I don't think that you necessarily need to do that. You can be the average guy, 9 to 5 job, got a family, got kids, got other obligations and responsibilities, and you can still be very successful in fantasy football or baseball. I just think that you got to have the right resources.
In fact, we'll talk about your role at ftnfantasy.com, but right now the content is so available out there right now, right? I mean, when you talk about 2009 or when we started this in 2004, we had magazines. There are a lot of magazines out there, and there were subscription services like baseballhq.com and fantasyguru.com and such. But today, there are so many options that can help you prepare for fab and weekly set lineups, because there are subscription-based ones that do nothing but tell you who you should be starting each week and who you should be picking up, right? It has changed in the last dozen years for sure, right?
Yeah. No, and you bring up a good point, because this is one big thing that I do talk about with subscribers at FTN. We have a Discord chat, so we're in there daily talking to the guys. And one of the things I tell them, whether it's me, myself, or another company or somebody else that's giving out advice, I think you should only be listening or reading material from one or two people. I think if you're listening or reading too much material, it's system overload and actually will confuse you. So I do tell the guys, listen, I won't take offense to it. I would love to that you guys would take my advice and subscribe to FTN, but if it's not your cup of tea and or whatever, I would suggest the site that you do go to, try to stick with one site or just a couple, because you start listening to Sirius XM and then in the car, and then you're listening to different podcasts and you're taking it all in. You have to be able to filter through a lot of noise.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of information out there for sure, and a lot of opinions, which is great. But I think I would stay with people that you trust for sure. Now let's talk about the two NFFC Platinum League titles, because you did that as a team. David Hubbard and Derek Pearson the first year. The second time you won, I think it was David and Austin Martin were your partners. Talk about how running a team with partners, one or two, is good and bad, because it does help to have various opinions, but sometimes they can get in the way of success as well, right?
Yeah, I would say that having a partnership, unless if you've got a partnership and it's like two alpha dogs, it makes it very difficult.
Yeah.
You have to have a unique relationship, and that's one thing that David and I have had for a long time. I'm very good friends with him, and I respect his opinion, and we've always made our relationship work. But we've had some, we call them healthy discussions. So through the years, there's definitely been those debates that we get into, because we're both passionate about it, and we're very strong. We have strong opinions on fantasy football. So I would say that piece is, if you don't have someone that can kind of just lay back and be kind of like the secondary person, you're definitely going to butt heads. But the good thing about it is you can spread out the work. Especially if you're doing volume. If you're doing quite a few teams, it really helps out if you've got a prior, family commitment, something that you got to go out and do, and you can't spend too much time with it, on the team or whatever. That definitely helps having a partner.
Yeah, definitely. And David's a very, very good player. He's in our top 5 in career earnings for NFFC. He hasn't played for a while with the NFFC, but he is a heck of a player for sure. When you guys would work together, how would you handle Fab then? Because Fab is very tough. The draft is tough enough, but how would you handle Fab? Did you split it together? Did one guy handle Fab mainly, or how'd that work?
Sure. So in the years past when we partnered, we were doing somewhere around 300 teams.
Yeah, wow.
When we partnered, and we would just split it, down the middle. He would take on, FFPC, and I would take on NFFC, and we just didn't mix it up. That way, we're focused on one format and one piece of software, and it made things easier. So that's how we split it, just down the middle, basically.
Yeah, definitely. Very interesting. It's not easy to play in multiple formats, and I know now you're concentrating mainly on the NFFC. Is there a reason why you like the NFFC for your high stakes contests? I mean, they're all great contests. So, they're competitive of ours, but everyone's good. But you like NFFC right now. Maybe just say a couple of things that you prefer with the NFFC. Again, we got third round reversal. We've got KDS. It's a little different. But once you understand it, hopefully those rules are to make it better for the player.
No, I think there's, a couple of high stake fantasy sites out there that run great contests. I just have a preference to NFFC, and it's mainly due to the price structure. And I like the fact that during the season, during the regular season, you can win money where it's not from like head to head. So there's not these, playoffs where, if you lose random week 14 or something like that.
Mhm.
Your team put up a dud, just had a bad week or whatever, you're out money.
Right.
So I like that. I like that it's more about, the whole season, and you get rewarded for that. And if you tie, whether you split like head the record and most points, you
Mhm.
go to a 3-week shootout with that other team.
Yep.
So, and then it comes down to most points in those 3 weeks.
Yep. Yeah, a
So
lot
I
of our
enjoy that.
prizes are based on total points. I mean, we want to reward, and this is all through trial and error over 19 years. We heard back from our players who said they wanted that. They didn't want all this head-to-head at the end. Week 14 this year, I believe, has 6 teams on bye. I don't know why the NFL does this to us, but 6 teams on bye in week 14, an important
Yeah,
week like that's crazy, isn't it?
it is. It is. So, at NFFC, that doesn't even come into,
Yeah.
it doesn't even come into my consideration when I'm, researching or preparing or doing a draft. I'm
Yeah.
not really worried about that. I'll be worried. I look at, schedules for like the shootout, the
Hmm.
last 3 weeks. I'll
Yep.
look at that, but, I don't have to worry about, bye weeks and it being in a playoff week or whatever.
Let's talk about the two things that we are different about. One is third round reversal. So we go 1 to 12, 12 to 1, and then we go 12 to 1 in round 3. We have found that it balances out each of the draft picks. It could be confusing if you don't know about it before you get in the draft room, but do you like, as a player, third round reversal?
I do like it. I think it adds a different twist to it, and being able to you're rewarding. I mean, a lot of guys. Listen, this started from like the LaDainian
Yeah.
Tomlinson,
Yeah.
days where
That's
if
it.
you had the number one pick,
Yep.
you just had a clear advantage.
Yep.
It was just night and day. So
Mhm.
it totally made sense that for the back half, if you wanted to go to pick 12 or 11, hey, I'm not getting LaDainian Tomlinson, but I'm going to get a quick pick there in the third round,
Right.
and it helps kind of balance things out a little bit.
Yep.
And we've seen you know pieces like McCaffrey. If he doesn't get injured, he would have been kind of a cheat code,
Yep.
similar to Tomlinson, in my opinion. Um, this year, a lot of people, although I don't think Jonathan Taylor is in that category, I think he's a very good player. I think a lot of people, they want to try to get the first pick in the
Yep.
draft,
Mhm.
and take Taylor. But for those that don't get him, I definitely think there's a strategy that you can build behind going to the back end, and how you can build your team from there.
Absolutely. I think the back end this year is really, really strong. I think the top 25, 26 is very strong. So I would have no problem 8, 9, back to 12. So let's talk about Kentucky Derby system. That's what KDS is. And this kind of started in 2006. When we started to do third round reversal, people said, why just give us a random draft pick? Why don't you let us decide? And in the Kentucky Derby, the trainer may have a horse who doesn't like the rail. So if he gets the first pick, he may put him on the outside. That's how it
Yeah,
started, right? Because
sure.
not all horses want to be on the outside, but they want to be on the rail. Some don't like being in the middle. So you allow the trainer to pick where he's going to go. With KDS, that allows you to pick what spot you want. So there's strategy involved ahead of time. Some guys, of course, go 1 through 12 every time. They want the first pick, the second pick, the third pick. But there's a lot of veterans right now who are mapping out where they want to draft. Do you do that with the multiple teams that you have?
I do, actually, and that's another thing that I really do like about the NFFC with the KDS, is that I can look at. So you know, I had 150 teams last year. Through the years, I've had 300 teams. So I do look at player exposure, and I
Mm-hmm.
look at how many player shares I have of and usually I concentrate more on like the top 8 rounds,
Yeah.
and I look at the first few, like the positions, whether tight end, who do I own the most or whatever. But in the first few rounds, I do look at that, and if I feel like I'm kind of heavy on a guy, I will adjust
Mm-hmm.
my draft preference. So let's say for instance this year, Cooper Cup. I
Mm-hmm.
keep getting the number 2 pick overall, and that's kind of Cooper Cup's area code, right? So I end up with a little too much Cooper Cup. I'll just say, oh, you know what? I don't have enough Jonathan Taylor. I'm going to put the 1 pick as my first preference, but I'm going to skip the 2 and 3 hole and go to the middle or go to the back end and have like pick 2 as like my last preference.
Right. You won't get it then because people will have that higher for sure. But yeah, that's what it's supposed to do, is to give you the opportunity to pick where you want to go. And when you have multiple teams, for sure, that's how it goes. So you live streamed some of your drafts last year on ftnfantasy.com. You did one the other night with Tom and Derek as well, which we love to do. We're going to do more of those as well. Tell folks what they can get when they join ftnfantasy.com, including these live streams. And what are you trying to do with the live streams? You're trying to show people how this works, I assume, right?
Yeah, with the live streams, it's kind of like, it's getting them comfortable with the draft flow,
right?
And where players are going and how to structure your team. So, I tell a lot of the subscribers at FTN that, listen, I don't want to badmouth it, but mock drafting is just that's the old days.
That's way past.
Yeah, you can't. I make a running joke that I mock draft for money. So these drafts right now that I'm doing, on the online championship, it's essentially a little bit of a mock draft for me, because I'm getting comfortable with the player ADP, where players are going. Whether, the other day I had the 2 pick, one draft I had the number 4 pick, and just getting familiar where players are landing, who can I get exposure to in that general, area. All those things, is where I start factoring in and creating a plan of, I don't know, come July, I'm hoping, in the zone, all systems go, and, avoiding any mistakes at that point. But I do a lot of that. Go ahead.
Do you feel that you give away some of your secrets? I mean, people are watching you. People are going to compete against you. You're in big money drafts in August and September. Do you feel like you've given away some secrets, or people are drafting against you and they kind of know who you like anyways?
Yeah, I think a lot of the players that do a decent amount of these drafts, they see me in there. I'm not under an alias. It's my name. So they see who I like. If it's a player that they like also, and, they, pick off that player around early, so be it. I found that the last couple of years that I can move along and navigate through a draft and not feel, frustrated that, anyone's, picking off my players per se. I do have, a fade list. So there is players that I do take off my board just based on where they're going in the draft. But all that does is it limits a little bit of the player pool, but I just push guys up at that point. I don't, I feel like if a player is going in the late 4th round, there's nothing wrong with taking them in the late or mid 3rd round. Like, if he's not going to come back to you, with the pick, then it's okay pushing him up, a little bit. But, I don't worry too much about that, Greg, to be honest. At first I was kind of like, okay, let's see how this is going to work. But I got into the content industry because I do enjoy what I'm doing. I enjoy helping others. I enjoy trying to give the information that I know and the experience I have, and try to help others, become, good fantasy players and winning players, over time. So I found that in order to do that, you have to be an open book, essentially, in order to do that. So.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about your fade list here in a minute, but talk about what people get at ftnfantasy.com. So if they subscribe to this service, they get your fade list. They get what else from you?
Sure. They get my rankings, different articles, various articles throughout the summer, my breakout players, late round sleepers that, are players I'm targeting. And then the Discord chat, which is,
Right.
they have access to me, 24/7 to ask questions on whether it's a trade in their league, whether it's, hey, I got a draft coming up, tonight. This is the pick I have. And then just kind of helping them walk them through, the draft flow. But hopefully by then they've already seen, some of my drafts and everything, and are familiar with the draft flow and the players. If they're using my rankings, the fade list and everything, then they should be in pretty good shape. And then throughout the season, to ask lineup questions, on Thursday and Sundays, talk about fab, questions on, pickups, things like that. I do a fab article every week that at FTN, but so they would get access to that, but also in the Discord chat, if, they need something for me to elaborate on and give more detail, I'm available there. So I think it's, they get a lot. And then it's not just me, they get access to, like Jeff Ratcliffe and his rankings. And, he was great last year. He killed it in the rankings. And, there's so many talented guys, there at FTN and all their content that they have. So there's quite a bit. It's not, of course we're doing the show and, it's about me, but, I will say that there is quite a bit that they get from the other guys at FTN. They do
absolutely.
A good job.
Like you said, Jeff was the #1 ranked rankings last year, I think, by PFF. Got Vlad Sedler, Matty Davis there yourself, so it's good stuff. Let's talk about your fade list. It's very popular every year. Tell folks how you come up with a fade list, and maybe tease a couple of guys. We don't give them all away, but tease a couple of your guys on your fade list this year and why.
Yeah. So how I come up with it is before I start drafting, and even as, here in the early part of, May and June, I'll tweak it a little bit, just based on ADP, for example. I look at guys that I think either, the offense, was downgraded around them, whether it's the offensive play calling, whether it's this, skill position players. I look at players coming off of injury, and then just their actual ADP and whether I think they're overvalued at that point. And then, I like other players at that position, more than them. So I look at it as, well, if I like these set of running backs, these handful of running backs, I'm never drafting this guy, then he's a fade, So I just never get exposure to that player unless, there's some unique, scenarios where guys maybe, drop a couple of rounds. And then I feel like for the amount of teams I do, I don't want to say that like everybody's off limits. There's always a potential for me to grab a guy if he slips far enough in the draft. But that's kind of how I come up with it. And then, as far as players, I got like 20 plus players on the list. So I don't know, like, you tell me, Greg, what do you want to know? What players?
Give me two guys. Give me two guys that are on your fade list and why.
All right. I have Mark Andrews.
Okay. Interesting. Wow.
So that would be a controversial one.
Yep.
That people would scratch their head about.
He's going too high for you?
He's going too high.
Yeah.
I look at it as he did a lot of damage and had a career year, but a lot of that damage was done with Tyler Huntley. And I believe Josh Johnson was quarterback for one game at the end of the year. And Andrews might have caught like 10 balls in that game with Josh Johnson. But if you look at when Lamar Jackson was healthy, he had just, so-so numbers. So I think with Lamar Jackson back healthy, the Ravens defense is going to be better this year. They were decimated by injuries last year. So they had to become more of a pass first team and change their identity a little bit. So I think with the health of the defense, they're going to be in more, neutral games rather than playing catch up. So I think that's going to be less targets. The running backs, Edwards and Dobbins should be back, hopefully back healthy by training camp and in the season. So that's going to, they might gravitate more to the run game a little bit more. So putting in all those factors, career year for Mark Andrews, going off the board sometimes ahead of Kelsey.
Yeah.
He's just an easy fade for me. I look at it as he's going to disappoint.
All right. Give me one more.
Let's see. Another one. I'm going to give you Elijah Mitchell.
Okay.
And that one is on the list just because of one of my rules that I follow for the fade list. So one of my rules when putting together the fade list is you fade a player that was a waiver wire pickup the year before, now going in the top 5 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
So Elijah Mitchell, great year last year, helped a lot of my teams. I had him on several teams just because of the way I built most of my teams. I went with kind of what you call like the hero running back strategy. First 2 rounds, I would take one, and then I would just, go 5 straight wide receivers, a tight end, a quarterback, and then I would completely punt my RB2. So a lot of my teams, that was kind of like the structure, how they were built. So Elijah Mitchell, right at the beginning of the year when Mostert got hurt, made sense for my teams. So, it's not because I don't like the guy. I had, quite a bit of him on my teams last year. It's just he was a waiver wire pickup, and the following year, that's just a rule of mine that I'm not going to draft him within the first few rounds.
All right. I like it. I like both of those. Okay. I got a question from Dr. Binky the Doormat. I don't know if he's a real doctor or not, but he tweeted out, he wanted to know who are a couple guys you see climbing up the rankings that maybe are under the radar right now.
Well, that's funny. Before today, I was already starting an article at FTN about my breakout running backs, and one of them that I felt was going to be going under the radar, and today was, I guess, a bad day to do the show and not get my article out because Travis Etienne, has been making a lot of noise today that, he's a full go and participating, in OTAs, ready to go. So that's been a big thing on Twitter, I noticed with him. So he's not going to go under the radar anymore, but he was a guy that I was definitely interested in this year. He's definitely on the list of my breakout running backs.
Yep. James Robinson is still hurt, so job's all his right now. Got one more?
And another guy, we'll go wide receiver position. Just the feeling that I have on this guy, and I think he's going late, and I think the kid's electric, and there's been a lot of like negative publicity on him, is Kadarius Toney, the wide receiver from the Giants.
Yep.
So he's a guy that, when I watched him last year, like, to my eye, like, he looked electric, and I don't want to hype him up too much and get too crazy with a comparison, but the moves he was making in the open field reminded me of Tyreek Hill. So he's a guy that, this year I circled that I definitely wanted to get exposure to him. And, he's going late enough that I'm probably going to I'm just going to keep drafting him and see what happens. If something happens and he's, benched off the team or whatever it may be, so be it. But where he goes in drafts, it's not going to hurt me.
Yeah, he's got a little Percy Harvin in him, I think, too. He's got that explosiveness and such. Unfortunately, it's the Giants, so we'll just have to see what happens with the Giants this year. I'm higher
on the Giants this year than years past.
Yeah, I
I
think
definitely
Daniel
think
Jones
they
has
have the
got
right.
something to play for as well, and if Barkley can stay healthy, which is the key, but it should be interesting. Okay, so my favorite team is the Packers. As you can see, I got Clay Matthews' ass right behind me on the wall. Give me your thoughts on Rodgers and give me your thoughts on Adams. Adams is going 9th or 10th in the first round. He's now going to a spot where his quarterback is different, but there's a whole lot of other targets there with Renfro and Waller and such. Is Adams going too high? And as far as Rodgers, he's like QB 10 right now. Is that justified?
Sure. So with Adams, he's tricky because he's joining a new team, and there was like it felt like 100 wide receivers changed teams this year.
Mm-hmm.
But he's an elite player. You don't see this too often in the NFL offseason. And he's one of those guys that I think because he has that rapport and in the past in college with Carr, I
Mm-hmm.
think that they'll hit it off. They've already been teammates before. They get
Right.
along. I don't think you make that kind of move to have him, you know, share targets with Waller or Renfro. I think Waller and Renfro are talented players in their own right, but I do think that Adams is gonna see a healthy target share, not to the point where it was with the Packers. That's just
Right.
not going to happen. But I still think that he's going to be solid.
Okay. How
And
about
then
Rodgers?
for Rodgers, man, unfortunately, I'm not gonna draft him this year.
Yeah.
I'm not fading him, just because he's going like I think the other night he went like in the 10th round or
Right.
11th round.
Yeah.
There's no point in fading a guy going that late, but
Right.
I just don't see the upside with him, to be honest, this year. I was disappointed with what the Packers did. You know, after the Adams trade, I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I expected them to make a trade for, maybe a not as an expensive wide receiver like Adams was going to cost, but at least somebody that was, pretty established. And I mean, they're going into camp right now with, it just looks ugly.
They're not bringing in any veteran, I can tell you. What they're doing right now is a transition on this team. They are not going into the playoffs saying Rodgers win it for us right now. They're going into the playoffs with a good running game and a good defense, and that's how they're going to try to win. And when Rodgers leaves, and if it's Love that comes in, they're not depending on the quarterback and 5 wides anymore. I think you're going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets, and you're going to see 2 running backs. And I think Jones could end up being the leading receiver on this team, because they're going to do a lot of swing passes and such. So I think it's going to be a totally different Packers offense this year. And if people are waiting for them to say, come on, bring in a veteran, I don't see it happening. The way the salary cap is right now, they just can't afford veteran salaries. I mean, they're already over the cap right now, and they got like 4 rookie wide receivers on the roster. So this is going to be a totally different team. But their defense, their 11 starters, are all either first-round draft picks or free agent signings. 7 first-round draft picks on the defense. So they're going to try and win that way than what they've done with Rodgers, who just cannot get it done in the playoffs for some reason.
Yeah. No,
Could be wrong, but I think that's what they're planning on doing. So let me ask you, when you draft multiple teams, are you diversifying your portfolio? Like you said, you kind of know how many teams or players you have on teams and such. Or are you looking for your breakout stars as many times as you can get them?
Yeah, so I usually like in the players that go in the first couple of rounds, I usually try to keep my exposure to 35%.
Okay.
Once I start seeing it going, higher than that, it's not about not believing in the player and that he's not going to break out. I have conviction in my analysis and the players I like. It's more just injury. It's the NFL,
Right.
and I call it, everybody's injury prone in the
Right.
NFL.
For sure.
It's just the sport, that they play. And for me, it's just more protection of, a guy not getting hurt. And then, there goes my first round pick that I had 70% on 70% of teams. That's bad business because,
Right.
I treat it as kind of like a stock portfolio. with the amount of teams I do, and just trying to manage the dollar amounts as far as what I have for player exposure. I factor in like when the prime times come around and like the platinum, like we talked about, that's
Yep.
a 20K league. So what I look to do is if I have a lot of exposure to a certain player between the onlines and the primetime main events, I won't necessarily just try to avoid that player in the platinum, but that's 20K worth of a player. I'm looking at, kind of like, okay, who's my second favorite player and possibly taking him. Or if I'm in a good spot, with a player and I like, 2 or 3 specific guys in the first round and I want to hang my hat on because it is a 20K league. So you got to have conviction. You got to take the players you believe in, right?
Yep.
That are you expect to have great years. Then I'll definitely, fire up those players.
Yep, definitely. So you also partner with Chad Schroeder. You've played with some of the best players out there and against some of the best players. There's really 3 components of football, and it's drafting, it's fab, and it's set lineup, right? What makes a high-stakes player really good? I know like in baseball, we talk about the grinders. Man, to make it through a 27-week baseball season, you've got to grind and fab. You got to grind. What about fantasy football? What makes a good high-stakes player that way?
I think there's just so many injuries that you throughout the season, like you do a draft come July or August, and you look at the end of the season on most teams, what their like the starting lineup is come week 17. It's totally different than what you thought it was going to be leaving that draft.
Right.
Just because of the injuries. So I believe what sets the players apart from like the elite players and like the good and or average players is fab. I think grinding. That you got to be really good at that and how to manage your money and try to be a step ahead, a week ahead on some of these players.
Yeah, so I think grinding in fantasy football is the same thing as baseball. You can't lose emotion about losing a player to injury. You just got to step up and get somebody else to fill in for the time being, right? It's all about points, and you just have to get points from every position every week of the season. So it's grind, grind, grind. Let's talk about rookies. How do you deal with rookies? Because right now, everybody loves the rookies, right? They want to be the people to say, I knew he was going to be the guy this year. I knew it. That's why I took him in the first round, right? Or do they get just pushed up too far for your liking right now?
Right now, I think rookies are going too early in drafts. So I've done a couple of onlines already, and that was my main takeaway from the rookies is that I didn't really love this rookie class this year. I thought it was a weak running back class. Yep. I thought the wide receivers, there's some talented guys there and some guys that went to like good situations, but overall, it was just, I wasn't, I haven't found those guys that I'm like super high on compared to like previous seasons. Like, Breece Hall, clear cut, RB1 going to the Jets. He's talented, but he's a guy that, he's going in the 3rd round already.
Sure is. Yep.
And, you get a little bit of hype this summer and he's going to be a 2nd round pick pretty easily. And I don't know. I feel like the Jets are still a developing team. I don't think he's going to like this like perfect situation.
Yep.
I think Michael Carter is still going to be involved in that offense. So I know it's not a popular opinion among most people out there, but he's probably a guy that right now my opinion is that he's going too high, and I don't see it. I don't see it changing, unless the coaches, unless some blurb comes out from like one of the beat reporters from the Jets that, hey, today at, practice, they were splitting reps. Well, that throws cold water into the hype and maybe he goes now in the 4th round. But I got a funny feeling that's not going to happen. I think it's just the hype balloon's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger.
I agree with you. And he is going pretty high. I wish he had gone to the Bills. Then I could justify that 3rd round and the 2nd round pick. But the Jets, That's a
Yeah.
little scary. I didn't really like the landing spot as well there. So, hey, let's talk about one other thing here. So in the NFFC, I think we're the only high stakes contest that gives 6 points per passing TD. And when you first look at that, you're like, oh my goodness, I got to get a quarterback because it's 6 points per passing TD. But guess what? It's the same 6 points for every quarterback that's on every team. And it's not like it just is this huge difference. How do you deal with the quarterbacks? Tom and I always talk on our show to wait on quarterbacks. But what do you do? How do you deal with quarterbacks? And does the 6 points scare you, help you? How do you look at that?
For quarterbacks, I just look at it as, do I want exposure to the top ones come shootout time? So, and it's just about, hey, having that quarterback that maybe puts up 2 50-point games like Joe Burrow did last year,
Right.
And you get that every once in a while where, one of the elite quarterbacks, and it's, they put up a couple of monster weeks because, the games are just shootouts or whatever it is. And you look at your teams and you're like, crap, I don't have any Josh Allen or Pat Mahomes or, whoever it is. So I just look at it more, from that standpoint. But my preference is I'm not a, take a quarterback early kind of guy.
Yeah.
I definitely wait till the more of kind of like that mid-tier and later.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, last year Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase made a lot of people a lot of money in those last final weeks there. It was unbelievable. I mean, Joe Burrow was like QB 12 last year, 13, and he just made people so much money. You just never know. You think, oh, come on, Patrick Mahomes, I have to have him. Joe Burrow could come out of there. The weeds this year, anybody like that. Let me also talk to you about one other thing that's big in fantasy football. That's the zero running back strategy. Now, Sean Siegley won the primetime, finished second overall that same year using the no RB strategy. You said that you took one running back and then you went wide receiver heavy after that. That's not really a no running back strategy, maybe a modified running back strategy. What are your thoughts on the no running back strategy, and can it win in high stakes fantasy?
Sure. So, I mean, not to contradict Sean, because he's a great guy, very sharp. But that year when he won the primetime, I was in there. I was playing in the prime times, so I was watching and remember his team, and he actually ended up with Jamal Charles in the first round. So he went Charles, and then he punted his RB2, and he went tight end and a bunch of wide receivers that year. And that's my preference. As far as going zero running back, I look at it as any strategy could win. But I think that when you go total zero running back, I've seen, people in drafts. I just think that that's almost, I feel like it's dead money. And the reason why I say that is because you're not punting one position, you're punting two. You're now looking for two running backs to be playable. No matter what, you gotta find two running backs. And the strategy behind it to say, okay, in season on Wednesday night in Fab, I'll find, that guy, what the starter gets injured, and I'm going to be on this guy and I'll bid on him and pick him up. Well, the thing is, the 11 other guys in your league, just because they didn't go zero running back doesn't mean that they're not after that same player, and he's not a target of theirs. So you're still trying to battle your league mates, for those handcuff running backs when they become available. So I feel like going one running back, just kind of that anchor guy that you can hang your hat on is the way to go. And then if you punt your RB2, I definitely think that you can make it work. Either you have the right handcuff already on your bench, from your later picks, or, at some point during the season, you pick up that key player on waivers. But I'm not a big proponent of the zero running back, just because I've tried it, with the amount of teams that I have through the years. I've tried all sorts of strategies. I kind of let the draft flow decide, how I go with picks. And sometimes I go wide receiver. And it just so happens that, I just don't want to force a running back that I don't particularly like, maybe in the third or fourth round. So I go wide receiver again, or a tight end, or whatever it may be. So that's my preference. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, last year Elijah Mitchell is a perfect example. People who needed a running back were like, "Aha! We just saw what he did in week 1. He's now available in week 2. I can get him." He went for 700, 800, 600. So you might have been able to get him, but you didn't have much fab money left after that. So I totally understand. I do think the modified running back makes a whole lot more sense in today's game. You get 3 really good wide receivers and an ace running back. You now have 4 guys that are scoring 17 to 22 points per game, right? And you can find that running back later on. It gets you 8 to 10 to 12 every week. So it's kind of like waiting on catchers in fantasy baseball. Okay, that guy, he's going to get less at bats and less bad batting average, but I can weather the storm there as long as all my outfielders and utility and everything is feeling good. And
because
so I think that makes a lot of sense.
To your point, Greg. So last year on my teams, like I said, a lot of my teams I structured that way, where it was just, I ended up taking a running back in the first or second round, and then waited on my RB2. And Elijah Mitchell was that guy that made sense on a lot of those particular teams. So, for those teams, when I was looking, I thought Elijah Mitchell was a guy that potentially could be a difference maker. It's early on in the season. I liked the offense, Kyle Shanahan, all those things, putting them into consideration. I went after Elijah Mitchell on a lot of teams. On teams where I had 2 established running backs, it was more of like keep them honest bids. But on those teams where I needed that RB2, I was pretty aggressive, and I was going 700 plus on those teams, but I had my mind made up that I could navigate through the season with $200 in whatever I needed to do with those teams, because listen, either those teams were going to be, I was going to get the wide receivers right, or I was going to get them wrong, and they were just going to be crappy teams. So if after taking that running back in the first or second round and having those wide receivers in the next, 6-7 rounds, I had the pieces in place already. I had my flex. I had the 3 wide receivers that I needed. So for me, the fit made sense. If you know what I'm saying? Because I mean, and I had success with it. Like last year in the online, at the end of the season in the shootout, it didn't come to fruition. I just didn't have the right. I didn't have the right player, mix of players. But I had over 50 online teams, make the shootout, which
that's awesome.
Was like, that was a record for me, for the amount of teams I had in the playoffs, and a lot of them had Elijah Mitchell, we're counting on Elijah Mitchell as the RB2.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, let me ask you about ADPs, because we have them out there, right? PlayNFFC.com/ADP. They're available for you. You can sort them by contest or date and time. Do you use ADPs, and how valuable are they to you?
I do enough drafts that as the summer rolls along, in my head, I already have kind of the ADP as far as where the players are going or should go. So it's just kind of, it's just more of a feel and experience. So I don't necessarily, use the ADP, but it is valuable, especially for the players that are only doing a few teams. They, let's say they're not drafting through the summer and they start up and they're doing their research come August, and they're drafting in September, and they're doing a handful of teams. The ADP, going in and choosing, the dates, for example, I do use it for my content at FTN. So for NFFC, I'll go into the ADP model and I'll select, last 6 days of drafts, for example, because come, August, September, there's just drafts, multiple drafts every day. So I'll use the most current ADP, to be able to deliver the content that I need at FTN.
Yeah.
But I'm in those drafts,
Yeah.
naturally.
You're producing the
So,
ADPs.
yeah, so I already kind of am, already comfortable with the ADP.
Yeah. All right. Couple questions left, and then we'll let you go. So when you're building your rosters, are you trying to build them to win the league title or the overall? Obviously, the answer is both, but you're trying to win the overall, aren't you?
Yeah. So the prime times and the online championships, I'm looking at it as I'm not trying to build, safe floor type of teams. I'm looking for the guys that more boom or bust.
Yeah.
And, for me, I look at it as long as I do a good job of avoiding the landmines in the earlier rounds, I should have a competitive team no matter what. But I'm still, I'm drafting looking for that overall title. Now,
Right.
when I go and do the New York Super or the Platinum or, a Diamond or an Ultimate,
Right.
that's a whole different ball game. I'm looking to, make sure the team is just rock solid, and it's a confined league. So you got to be aware of, the players in your league and what they're doing and what they're trying to do. And if they're trying to block you, so I try not to get too cute, at quarterback and, waiting real late and end up,
Right.
I don't want to be in the Platinum with Marcus Mariota and,
Right.
that kind of quarterback play.
Right.
I'm looking for, someone projected a little bit better.
All right. Last one, and I thank you for taking the time to do this. I hope everybody enjoyed it. It's informative for sure. And again, what we're trying to do is introduce our players to the top players in the industry. And Nelson is definitely one of them. I think he gave you a lot of good advice. Check him out at ftnfantasy.com. Get on his Discord, because like he says, he'll answer your questions any time of the day as well. So, Nelson, any advice for people that haven't played high stakes fantasy yet, but want to get in? Some people say, oh, those guys, they've been doing it for years. How can I compete against them? Hey, we've seen people come in the first year and do very, very well. Thomas Libretti won the online championship and the prime time. A lot of people didn't know who he was. They do now. Any advice?
You got to start somewhere.
Yep.
So I look at it as you have to figure out what your bankroll is, what your financial means are. You can get involved in high stakes doing, $25 best balls. You can do, $125 leagues here at NFFC. And then if you want to compete for, the bigger prizes and you can afford to do an online championship for $350, then I suggest that you're well prepared, well versed. Again, I would hope that people would find me on Twitter or at FTN and be able to sign up and get advice, and so that they can prepare for those drafts. But I think you just gotta start somewhere. You gotta go draft a team, make sure you're well prepared, and go from there. You don't have to go and get into the prime times right away and do multiple teams right away. Just get your feet wet and see how you compete.
Absolutely. All right, go to playnffc.com. Like Nelson said, we've got $25 best balls, we got $50 best balls, we got 150 best balls. Good way to get started out. Check out our ADPs at playnffc.com/ADP and just get in the game. You can't win if you don't play, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. You're going to enjoy the community. And if you ever come to the live events, we're at the Bellagio and Park MGM this year in Las Vegas. We're in New York City as well. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Nelson, thank you very much, and good luck in all your leagues this year.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.